Yeah, so I'm purely an academic and I shall be talking about digital preservation, and I'll try to focus more on digital preservation, particularly in low-resource environments. But of course, the ideas I have and the perspectives I need to share will still be relevant even in any other discipline. Okay. Can you confirm you can see my screen and that you can hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
If you just want to put it to full screen, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay, full screen and slide. How is this?
It's okay. Okay. Let's go with it. Thanks.
Okay, fine. So essentially, my presentation is going to follow this outline. I will briefly talk about digital preservation, of course, not much because this concept has been adequately discussed even from the previous presenters. And I will speak a little bit about the digital preservation policy, content prioritization, and the need to use open source tools. Because like I said, my talk is focused on trying to help digital preservation in low-resource environments. So I'll also talk about cloud computing from that perspective as well of using open source tools. So as you may have heard from all the previous presenters, digital preservation, which we are ultimately discussing in this conference, is the process of maintaining and safeguarding digital assets for the long term. And the overall goal for doing all this is to ensure the long-term accessibility, usability, and authenticity of our digital assets, such as records, images, audiovisual materials, websites, databases, and other electronic resources. And what this implies is that digital preservation is actually a combination of strategies, practices, and technologies aimed at preventing data loss, degradation, or obsolescence, and maintaining the integrity of digital objects over time. So now, in low-resource environments, achieving effective digital preservation can be challenging due to limited financial, technical, and human resources. However, there are strategies and techniques that can be employed to address these challenges and ensure the longevity of digital assets. And I believe that the key strategy, the primary strategy, is to develop a digital preservation policy as a starting point. And to that effect, I just want to touch on what I perceive to be the key components of a robust digital preservation policy. It includes the inclusion of a purpose, a clearly defined the purpose of the policy and its scope. When you do this, you have to specify which digital assets are covered and outlining, of course, the context in which the policy will be applied. This is very crucial. And much as it might sound obvious, it's also very critical that as you develop a digital preservation policy, you assign the roles and responsibilities to staff members or departments for various aspects of the digital preservation process, such as selection, storage, format migration, metadata management, and risk management. And on top of all that, it's critical that your digital preservation policy must address legal and ethical issues related to digital preservation, such as copyright, data protection, privacy, and of course, intellectual property rights, as well as any relevant industry standards for or best practices. Then in that same digital preservation policy, it's crucial again to establish a criteria for determining which digital assets should be prioritized for preservation based on factors such as their value, uniqueness, and risk of loss or obsolescence, which has been touched on several times by the previous speakers. And of course, you have to outline the storage and backup solutions that are going to be used, including the use of multiple copies and diverse storage locations to ensure redundancy. To ensure redundancy and protect against data loss. So, well, I need to really touch broadly on this aspect because like I said, I believe it sets the framework for successful digital preservation because it has to start from a clearly defined digital preservation policy. So I would want to go on and say, in the policy, you should also describe the approach to file format management. This would include monitoring for obsolescence, format migration, and of course, the preferred formats for long-term preservation. You need to specify the metadata standards and the practices to be followed, which may include the use of established schema. It can also include controlled vocabularies and consistent metadata creation processes. And of course, you need in that policy again to define the access controls and security measures in place to protect the digital assets from unauthorized access, from tampering or deletion, while also ensuring that authorized users can still access the materials as needed. And of course, you have to also outline the processes for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks to digital assets, as well as the strategies for disaster recovery in the event of data loss or damage. So there has to be procedures in place for regularly evaluating, the effectiveness of the digital preservation program. And when doing that evaluation, you need to identify areas that need further improvement and making necessary adjustments, of course, to the policy and to the practices. Then last but not least, I believe in collaboration and partnerships with other institutions, professionals, and organizations. It's very important, especially if you manage to partner with other organizations in the digital preservation field. It will help you to share knowledge, to share resources and expertise. And of course, you need to recognize the importance of staff training. And this was already touched on by the previous speaker. Training and professional development in building and maintaining the organization's digital preservation expertise is very important. So all these aspects must be a part of the digital preservation policy that I said serves as the foundation on which a strong digital preservation strategies can be built. Then considering that I'm particularly focusing on low-resourced environments, I should obviously indicate the point that you have to prioritize content. You need to assess the value and importance of your digital assets to determine which should be prioritized for preservation. Doing this will actually allow you to allocate limited resources more effectively, so to speak. Then, again, coming from a low-resourced environment, sometimes it may be difficult to get what are perceived as the best of digital preservation tools. So I would encourage the use of open source tools. There are many free, actually, and open source digital preservation tools that exist, which can be used for various tasks, such as file format identification. You can have open source tools for metadata extraction and, of course, migration. And the examples I have, which I'm familiar with, are Droid, especially the digital record object identification tool. I've used it in my teaching sessions to demonstrate how this one can be used as part of digital preservation. So in my next slide, I will talk a little bit more about this open source tool. But there are others like Apache Tika and Bugger. So these and other tools can help minimize the cost while, of course, still providing the necessary functionality. Droid, which I promised to talk about, the digital record object identification. This one is a digital preservation tool that was developed by the National Archives in the UK. It's designed to identify and validate file formats, which is a crucial aspect of digital preservation. So Droid primarily focuses on file format identification, which is a critical aspect of digital preservation, I must say. It uses Pronom, a signature-based file format registry to identify and validate file formats. So Droid can actually identify various file formats, including text, images, audio, video, and many more. So the tool can also process large-scale collections, making it useful for institutions with vast digital repositories. Then another reason why I do encourage the use of open source tools like Droid is that, for instance, this particular tool, it offers a user-friendly graphical user interface and a command line interface for more advanced users. So the graphical user interface, it provides an intuitive environment to navigate and manage files, while the command line interface is more suitable for scripting and batch processing tasks. So this flexibility caters for users with different skill levels and preferences. And again, Droid's extensibility is one of its strengths because it relies on Pronom for file format identification. Updating the signature files allows Droid to recognize new or updated file formats without needing to modify the tool itself. So it makes it easier to maintain the tool and ensures that it remains up to date with the latest file format developments. So I want to say that Droid is a valuable digital preservation tool, especially in the area of file format identification and validation. Of course, it's not the only one. I just picked it to use it as an example. I believe there are many out there which can be used. So, but its ease of use and extensibility, as well as community support, it makes it a reliable choice for institutions and individuals involved in digital preservation efforts. However, I think it's crucial for me to highlight that Droid focuses only on file format identification. So, and organizations will need to employ additional tools and strategies to address other aspects of digital preservation, such as metadata management, storage, and of course, migration. Then regular backups are very important and key. I'm sure this is an almost obvious point, but nonetheless, it remains important and it needs to be mentioned that an institution seeking to achieve successful digital preservation has to perform regular backups of digital assets to ensure data protection. And on top of backups, you need to also store multiple copies in different locations, preferably in a combination of on-site and off-site storage. This will help in minimizing the risk of data loss from localized threats like natural disasters or even hardware failure. Then cloud computing for digital preservation is another outstanding and prominent topic that ought to be discussed always when we talk of issues of digital preservation. So I would encourage institutions, again, in both low-resourced and highly resourced environments to consider the use of cloud storage services, which I believe actively in use, because, cloud computing is often cost-effective, and usually it offers scalable solutions for storing and managing digital assets. But I'm sure we all appreciate and are aware of the potential dangers and risks that are associated with cloud computing. And therefore, it's important always to make sure to evaluate the reliability and security of the service provider, as well as any potential implications for data privacy. Then data migration is an aspect that cannot be ignored or that cannot be overemphasized, rather, when we talk of digital preservation. And to that effect, I need to highlight that it's important that you plan for periodic data migration to keep digital assets in accessible and up-to-date formats. This will involve migrating files from obsolete or less supported formats to more widely used and stable formats, as well as updating storage media, as technology evolves. I remember listening to Shadrach's presentation. He spoke quite at length about migration and the many challenges that it brings. So, having said that, data migration, of course, in a low-resource environment can be challenging due to limitations in computing power, challenges like network bandwidth, or financial resources. But however, with careful planning and the right approach, it's possible to actually achieve successful data migration, even under these constraints. So, yeah, there are some strategies for data migration that low-resourced environments institutions can employ. The first one is the need to assess the environment. What this means is that you have to evaluate the current resources that you have, such as the hardware, the software, and network infrastructure, to determine the available capacity for the data migration process. You need to identify potential bottlenecks and constraints that may impact the migration, constraints such as limited processing power, storage capacity, or network bandwidth. Then from there, like I mentioned previously, you need to prioritize data. I keep mentioning this because it's important. Now we are swimming in a sea of data because of there are many advancements in technology, but unfortunately, we don't have all the resources that are required to take care of this data. So prioritization becomes a very important component, especially in low-resource environments. So you need to prioritize which data to migrate first. You need to analyze the data to be migrated and identify the most critical data sets that need to be moved first. So this can actually help ensure that essential data is available in the target system as soon as possible. Then you need to, after the prioritization first, you need to develop a detailed migration plan that obviously takes into account the available resources, the prioritized data sets, and any potential risks or challenges. So the plan should include a timeline, resource allocation, and of course, contingency plans for addressing any issues that may arise during the migration process. Then you need to optimize data transfer. This is very important, I repeat, particularly in low bandwidth environments. It's essential to optimize data transfer to minimize the impact on the network. So this may include compressing data using incremental or differential data transfer methods, or scheduling data transfers during off-peak hours to reduce, of course, the congestion on the network. Then, just like the file format identifiers open source tools, there are also open source data migration tools. And this means you need to go for lightweight tools, or even open source data migration tools that can run efficiently on low resource systems. And I did some research and came across some examples of such tools that you can employ. But of course, this is not to mean these are all, like I said previously, but the examples you may want to try out are Apache NiFi, Talend Open Studio, and dbeaver. These tools often have a lower resource footprint, making them suitable for environments with limited computing power. And the other thing, you have to perform thorough testing and validation of the migration data to ensure that it has been transferred correctly and without corruption. So again, in a low-resource environment, this may involve manual validation or the use of lightweight data validation tools. So if the low-resource environment makes data migration too challenging, you may want to consider outsourcing the migration process to a professional data migration service, or maybe you can use cloud-based data migration solutions. These options may require additional, of course, financial resources, but they can help ensure a successful data migration without straining existing infrastructure. Collaboration, which I mentioned right from the beginning of my presentation, is very important. You have to form partnerships with other organizations that have similar digital preservation goals, especially those in low-resource environments. This can lead to shared knowledge, resources, expertise, as well as the development of collaborative projects and solutions. So yes, networking and collaborating is very key. And I think I shouldn't repeat on this point because my predecessor did justice in as far as highlighting the importance of training and capacity building is concerned. Yes, but of course, just like any other work that's done, monitoring and review is very critical and key. You need to regularly evaluate your digital preservation efforts to identify areas for improvement and adjust the strategy accordingly. This can include monitoring the performance of your tools, reviewing your policies. Remember from the onset, I mentioned that the starting point to a successful digital preservation strategy is to have a policy in place. So once this policy is developed, it doesn't become fixed. It needs to be periodically reviewed and accordingly adjusted so that you stay updated on developments in the field. Then last but not least, you have to raise awareness about the importance of digital preservation among stakeholders, especially your funding agencies, the policymakers, and members of the public, of course. This can help garner additional resources and support for your organization's digital preservation efforts. So basically, this is all I had to share with you. And in as much as I was focusing on institutions in low-resource environments, I believe some of the strategies and ideas I raised may be beneficial to all institutions that are seeking to implement digital preservation strategies for the sake of long-term preservation, accessibility, and usability of digital assets in their respective institutions.